Good evening, class. This is Sean Shetler in CHRI 6309-C01, Homiletics with Dr. Trent Henderson. And today I'll be giving an excerpt from my sermon on Joshua chapter 3 and 4. And point number 3, control forgets to remember. And the text is based on Joshua 4, 6 through 7. When your children ask, tell them. Point number 3, control forgets to remember. In the text, Joshua 4, 6 through 7. And the main point, forgetting what God has done often leads us to try to take back control. Remembrance builds trust. Have you ever forgotten something really, really important? Not your keys or your phone. I mean something God did for you. Something big. If we're honest, most of us don't forget because we're ungrateful. We forget because we move on too quickly. And when we forget what God has done, you know what we usually do next? We try to take control. And that's exactly what today's passage warns us about. In Joshua 4, God had just done something wild. He parted the Jordan River so that the Israelites could cross into the Promised Land. The moment their feet touched the water, it stopped flowing. Can you imagine that? But immediately after the miracle, God told them to do something strange. Collect 12 stones from the riverbed and build a memorial. Why? Because he knows us. We forget. And forgetting is dangerous because it tempts us to take control. The problem of forgetting. Moses' example. Let's stay in the story, but let's zoom out a bit to the generation before Joshua, to Moses. Moses was a faithful leader chosen by God who saw incredible miracles, the burning bush, the Red Sea parting, manna from heaven. But even Moses had a moment where he forgot. In Numbers chapter 20, God tells Moses to speak to a rock so water would flow out for the people. But instead, Moses strikes the rock twice. Why? Because he was angry, frustrated, and tired, and maybe even embarrassed. But underneath it all, he lost sight of who was really in control. Moses forgot it wasn't about his leadership or reputation. It was about God's provision. That moment of control cost him the promised land. And that's what forgetting does. Even the most faithful among us can reach for control when we stop remembering who God is and how he works. And that's why God is telling Joshua's generation, build a memorial. Don't forget, because the moment you do, you'll be tempted to take matters into your own hands. And control, my friends, is a counterfeit comfort. Remembrance, that's what builds real trust. So what's with the 12 stones? They were visual reminders, faith markers. God wanted his people to be able to point to something and say, right there, that's where God showed up. Not just for them, but for their kids. When your children ask, tell them, God says. This isn't just about nostalgia. It's about building a legacy of faith through remembering. Why God calls us to remember. So why did God tell them to build a pile of rocks? I mean, 12 stones from a riverbed might not seem like much, but in God's eyes it was a faith formation tool. He says, when your children ask you what do these stones mean, tell them the story. Tell them what God did. Why? Because we forget fast, and so will the next generation. And these stones weren't just for decoration. They were a reminder that God made a way where there was no way. And here's the thing. God knows that the next battle, the next challenge, the next temptation to take control, it's coming. But if you've got reminders, stones, let's say, I've seen God be faithful before, you're more likely to trust instead of panic. And trust is what gives you peace when everything else says you should be afraid right now. Modern application. What are your stones? So let me ask you, what are your stones? What are the moments in your life where God made a way? Did he free you from addiction? Did he answer your prayer? Did he provide for you when you were desperate? Those moments matter, but only if you remember them. Write them down. Tell someone. Start a God did this journal. Create a tradition within your family to talk about answered prayers. Because the more you remember, the less you'll feel the need to control everything tomorrow. Challenge. Stop grabbing control and start building memorials. When fear creeps in and when the bank account looks low, the diagnosis comes in, or your plans fall apart, will you try to grab for control or will you remember? And when you remember what God has done, it gives you peace to trust Him again. But you got to build those stones of remembrance. You got to mark the moments. Let those moments speak louder than your fear. Encouragement. Today, maybe your next step isn't to move forward. Maybe it's to look back, to remember, to mark the moment, to write it down so you don't forget and so you don't fall back into control because trust is built on testimony. Let's be people who remember and let's be people who build stones because we serve a God who parts rivers. Your story is a stone. Maybe you're thinking, I don't have any big stories. Nothing miraculous like crossing a river or getting water from a rock. But friends, your story is a stone. That time God gave you peace in the middle of a storm, that moment He sent someone to encourage you at just the right time, the provision you didn't see coming, those are stones. They may not look dramatic, but they're evidence that God showed up. Don't minimize your moments. Memorialize them. Write them down, tell a friend, and share them with your kids. Because you never know when your story will remind someone else or your future self that God is still faithful. You don't need to control everything. You just need to remember who's in control. Build your memorial. Here's the invitation today. Build your memorial. You may not have your river stones, but you've got moments. You've got memories of when God met you in the middle of the mess. When He gave you just enough strength, just enough grace, and just enough light to take the next step. Don't let those moments fade. Don't let fear rewrite the story. Write it down. Speak it out and share it with someone. Because when the next Jordan River stands in your way, you'll need those reminders, not to just look back in nostalgia, but to move forward in confidence. And God has never failed you. And God's not about to start now.